Alrighty. Leo, let's get going.
All right, I'll be very brief. Lauren and Brad in particular have been working very hard and doing a lot of community input as relates to proposed downtown arts and entertainment ordinance. That's all, and I think Lauren will get into this, but trying to anticipate, the vibrance of downtown and facilitate that and be proactive rather than reactive to ideas and events that might come along. And so we're nearing final draft stage and thought it appropriate to report out to you in anticipation of bringing this ordinance to you shortly for your consideration. So with that, I'll turn it over to the two of you.
Brad and Ann are here, and Dean and several other folks who have been on the stakeholder committee. So I've told everybody just to kind of chime in as we go. There's a lot of material here. As we're going through this, so nobody gets anxious, we've actually amended our project schedule. We're going to do 2 study sessions with you. We're doing one today, and then we're doing one in January. Because as a final decision-making body, there's a lot of material and implementation and several other things you're probably going to want to talk about, but there's zero way we could probably get through all of that in one study session. So today's goal is to do an overview so you start to understand the content, and then also talk more in depth about the process and how we got here. And then in January, we'll get into details about the draft itself and about implementation and what that looks like. So, kind of a 2-parter. Get rid of this slideshow thing. Well, like that. There we go. So, one of the things somebody may be wondering if they just came across this is, why did we do this? One of the things that became really obvious to all of us as we started to implement the new infrastructure for downtown and the new streetscape is, wow, it's important to have an engaging, open, inviting space that all these other uses can come into, but we don't really have the code infrastructure to match the physical infrastructure. Well, that's definitely a disconnect. There's also an essential part of our downtown is that creativity. So where artists and musicians can be a part of that, and they definitely give that lifeblood to things. So how can we enable that to be present? And I don't know about you, but I like saying yes a lot more than I like saying no. And what people often don't realize is if something's not in code, just because it's not in code doesn't mean it's okay. It often is what's allowed is outlined, and other things that are not identified are usually prohibited. So the way the code currently worked is we didn't have a lot of these things identified, so the answer would usually have to be no. Or if we could find a way to yes, it was quite convoluted or very complicated. So how do we not only embrace these things, but also make it easy, make it simple and efficient to comply? So when we started looking at kind of objectives of what we were going to do, we needed to resolve where we had conflicts in code. We needed to streamline the process itself and make understanding the requirements easier. So even those things that we could manage to say yes to right now, you might have to go to this section of code over here and this section of code over here, then turn around, jump upside down, and then go over here. I mean, there was just no easy way to do this. We also needed to make sure that the code would be dynamic and accommodating. So we could think of a lot of great ideas right now, but more than likely, creative, entrepreneurial individuals are going to think of more things to do. I'd like to not have to do this all over again. So we looked at how to develop the code so as a new use came in, we would be able to integrate that new use and it would work with the way the code was set up. So it gave room for it to grow. We recognize too that it's not just about the code. It's about the support materials, whether those are through graphics or maps or informational pages. It's about policies. It's about how you apply. Is it a paper application? Is it online? What makes those things easier? And that this needed to be done in close partnership with various stakeholder groups. So looking at who was going to be affected by this and making sure that we understood what the current environment did and how any new rules would affect them. So how big is this change? Because it sounds pretty easy, like, oh, just pop in a new district. This is quite an undertaking, but one very worth taking on. This is just a glance, and this, if anybody's been at our stakeholder committee meetings, they would be familiar with this, because one of our first meetings, we put this list up and said, right now, if you want to do something downtown, you may have to go to one or multiple of these sections to figure out what the rules were. And so it's not just one spot, it's several different chapters, subsections, knowing that we were going to have to touch these and probably develop new sections of code. So, as I mentioned, process was really important. We've been at this since essentially like February, March of this year. So we have a stakeholder committee of over 35 people. Regularly in attendance, we have at least 30, if not more. So, and the stakeholder committee has been amazing that if, for instance, one of them couldn't attend and maybe there was somebody in their organization or business who was more experienced with that, they kept them in the loop. And so we always had a lot of attendance and a lot of feedback. We worked really hard with SDI and other folks and different boards and commissions to realize kind of how many people could possibly be affected by this. We also included our higher education facilities. So KU Medical School has had representation. K-State Poly has had student representation, who's been great and really involved. Kansas Wesleyan attended a couple of meetings, and they've just been in the loop since then. We even expanded after our first meeting. North Salina's got representation as being kind of an area that butts up to there. Of course, artists, food truck owners, different types of businesses have all been involved in this too. And then several members of SDI are represented on the stakeholder committee. They met roughly every 27 days.
Roughly?
Yeah. Some months, towards the last couple of months, we've met a little bit more frequently, but 27 days is about the cycle by the time we get their comments, develop materials, meet with them again, was kind of the reasonable nature of it. In the last couple of weeks, we had, actually just last week, we had a public open house meeting where we went over basically the same presentation we're doing with you right now in large printouts with various members of the public. That was posted in the newspaper, posted on the city site, and then asked our different stakeholder committee members to kind of push that out to let people know about it. We had a complimentary kind of bookend to that at the beginning of the project in March, held another open house as we went into things asking the public where they wanted to go with it. Those two meetings were suggestions of this body when we started this process. You suggested, add one more layer of public involvement there, so we had those two bookends for the public meetings.
Lauren?
Yes.
Might also mention on the stakeholders that it included residents of downtown, not just businesses, but a segment of the professional population, the retail population, food service, and the cultural sector all had representatives there. So it really kind of covered the full gamut of all of those that are served within the district.
Mm-hmm. Brad and I have been on a road show the last couple of weeks and have been visiting boards and commissions that are involved with downtown or have issues that are related to downtown that come in front of them. We are on our last two meetings tomorrow. We're visiting
Travel and tourism.
Travel and Tourism and the Planning Commission. And then that would move us to City Commission. So doing this study session, one in January, and then with first and second reading at the end of January, beginning of February. So in addition to having the stakeholders, which was kind of the central part of our public involvement in this project, because you got to kind of talk to the people who are doing it to really understand how the code applies. But in addition to that, all of our committee meetings were advertised in the paper. So even though there was a stakeholder committee, any member of the public could have attended. We always had general public forum available at the meetings. We also have a really involved project page where any of the meeting materials that came out of those meetings were posted there so people could see them afterwards or ahead of time. We also had our entire subject schedule and meeting schedule for the year posted in advance So if you were really only interested in food trucks, like you would have been able to know that in advance. We also used, in certain cases, especially in the beginning, with the stakeholder committee surveys to kind of put pictures and stuff out in advance of the meeting to get that feedback so it could help us tailor materials. And then just kind of worked our way through the different subject matter. And in the last couple of months, it's really been kind of getting down to the details of what their ideas look like in print. Let's see. So stakeholder committee, like I said, these are the original people who signed up. On a regular basis, we had at least 30 in attendance.
Apologize.
So what does 9 months of meetings boil down to? And what we recognized is that there are a lot of moving pieces. I mean, we kind of joke it's a can of worms, but I mean, it was more than just making food trucks legal. It was more than just buskers, that there were a lot of moving pieces to this. So what we have come up with is there will be a new district that will lay over that area, and I've got the map in a minute, but that will handle the uses. But in addition to that, you can't talk about those uses without talking about special events, which we actually have never had an adopted section of code for that. You can't do that without talking about alcoholic beverage, because if people want to have a party downtown, or can I have a beer, can I have near beer, what can I do downtown? What sections of code can we eliminate because we were able to streamline the process? And so being able to identify those, looking at new maps that embrace all of this, process, procedures, support material, and the website. So all these work products are getting created in order to create that infrastructure for downtown use. So just an outline of what the Downtown Arts and Entertainment District section of code will look like. And this is where we try to kind of create a one-stop shop. So essentially you've got all your great administrative components, purpose and intent, definitions, establishment of the district, but then we get into specific use standards. So we've hit sidewalk dining, which we have already, and we'll get a little bit more into details, but it would get moved into this piece. You've got the outdoor merchandise area, that's something new. We've got sidewalk entertainment, food trucks, push carts, aesthetics, and transportation for hire. And then additionally, you have you have one place to deal with the application procedures. So do you get an allowed use permit, or do you get a license agreement? How do you apply for this? What attachments need to be given? Where would you go? And of course, violation enforcement and penalties. So now we'll talk a little bit about some highlights of what we tried to accomplish with these things. So for sidewalk dining, as I mentioned, it's currently allowed. This section of code is about dining establishments. So, often we think of like more of our traditional restaurants, but also like Ad Astra, if they wanted to do outdoor dining, or Coops, like they would fall into that dining category, where the outdoor merchandise areas for retail. And these are very complementary, because right now as a restaurant or a dining facility, you can have that extra space out on the sidewalk, be able to, be seen, create that environment, but you don't really have anything like that for retailers. And so this is kind of the complement to that. And one thing to remember with sidewalk dining is it gets affected by alcohol. So the type of use and how you apply, the type of license is also affected by that. Conceptually, we're generally along the same lines of what we were allowing with sidewalk dining. So it's not like if you've made the investment in sidewalk dining, no, it'd be totally different. I mean, the concepts are generally the same. They're just getting moved in to this section. We are tweaking the process for how you renew your license agreement for that. We found in the last couple of years is trying to go through that. It's not a very smooth process, so we were going to smooth that out a bit. And then just clarifying some of that language. Outdoor merchandise area is, we affectionately kind of call it the bubble. And for an outdoor merchant, this more than likely is not a permanent space. This is more of a temporary kind of thing, so it would be done through an allowed use permit, and we'll talk a little bit more about the difference of those. That's where if you've got a rack of whatever, or a bin of specialty socks, or a special sign, or a bench or something that you want to pull in and out every day as a merchant, with your bubble, you're able to do that. If you want to permanently keep things out there, it's similar to outdoor dining that a license agreement would be required. I can't think of an example in downtown Salina, but when I was in northern Arizona, for instance, like a sculpture gallery had large semi-permanent structures they had out front of their store and had gone and done a license agreement to keep those out there. Once they were sold, they would wheel another one out there. That's an example of how maybe an outdoor merchant might want a license agreement for something permanent in the sidewalk. So then we get into sidewalk entertainment. I think this, from where we've been going just in the last couple weeks of talking, this might become sidewalk performers, but the concept is the same. Currently, it's allowed, but there's no specific code stating that. And so a lot of times people are wondering, like, where can I stand? How can I stand? Can I take money? How do I pay taxes? There's a lot of uncertainty there. We've learned a lot in the last month or so about First Amendment rights and freedom of speech. And so our code has been very conscious of that and trying to make sure that we're not impeding that, but we're keeping safety as far as like keeping the sidewalks clear and being able to allow people to get where they need to get, whether it's entering their building or exiting their building or being able to cross the street. Most of our sections will require some level of insurance, but in working with risk management and looking at what other municipalities are doing, basic sidewalk entertainment, if you're not using knives and fire and stuff like that, you're just out strumming your guitar, no insurance should be required for that. And that also helps in not, that freedom of speech. You have the right to stand on the side of the street and sing. And just because you're standing there singing doesn't mean you have to have insurance for that. So compared to other uses where you're permanently affixing something to the sidewalk or creating a large event where you're taking responsibility for people, that would not have an insurance requirement. And then aesthetics, this is really getting into, temporary art has become one of these, and looking at, some of the creative groups in town have said, hey, if we just want to put up something for 7 days and, we would take it down, we're going to take responsibility for that, and it's along this trash container, what does that involve? How can we do something like that? Where some artists are like, if I wanted to put a temporary art up there for 30 or 60 days, is that a longer process? What does that look like? And so we've been trying to kind of look at different communities and how they manage kind of this temporary art world. And so we're right now kind of looking at a 7-day or less option and then a longer option of what that means. And a lot of that's about responsibility. Do you have insurance for it? Have we dealt with risk, the appropriateness of it, cleaning it up, things like that. Signs, flags, and banners. You should be a little bit familiar with this. What you've been looking at in the sign code for temporary signs applies also to this project, because the beautiful banners you might see on light posts or feather flags that could go in front of buildings for First Friday, right now those things aren't legal. So by legalizing that, SDI could buy feather flags, appropriately have them weighted, and be able to roll those out into the sidewalk and be able to do that. Sculptures and murals are generally covered already through our processes, but part of making the code comprehensive is at least identifying those. So if somebody's looking at that, saying, how does that work? Murals are also something we've been learning a lot about, not just from our First Amendment right, but also like, what is a sign and what is a mural? And so that's been challenging, and there's a lot of very recent case law on that, and some of the things that we're working with legal on and trying to look at other municipalities and their examples, because murals are amazing. They can add a lot to the community, a lot of color, a lot of vibrancy, they create a lot of energy, but just being able to find a clear process in which the artists and the community can engage And some of these things are just kind of setting some standards. If you're gonna put a mural up, is there an expiration date to it? I mean, who maintains it? Some of that is also being able to help the public understand kind of the expectation of that mural. Will it be there forever? You know, if it starts to chip, who fixes it? That kind of thing. Am I missing anything, Brad, on those topics?
No, the only thing that I might mention, and this we can maybe talk more at wrap up if necessary, but some of the management of that won't be done by code, it'll be done by guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of some best practice models or some staffing work that we could do to help streamline that process and better inform a merchant who may be asked to have a mural added to their building, or a building owner, or an artist who has an interest in doing that, but where do I start? That doesn't have to be done in code, but through guidelines, and that's what our staff will be working on to help supplement what Lauren's department is doing with code writing.
And we've looked, the stakeholder committee saw several examples of these in other municipalities that had good programs. We were very partial to Boise has an excellent program and is a very mural-friendly community. We've looked at smaller communities. We've also looked at some of the really new legislation coming out of like San Francisco and LA, where trying to find that line between art and signs. So,
Besides, the other thing I might mention while you're on that slide was entertainment. Anna's done a lot of work in kind of researching what are some good current and best practices for things like busking or sidewalk performance, and there's kind of a whole level of professionalism of buskers in some larger cities or where they're more established than what we've been used to here. And going back to Lauren's point, trying to anticipate not where are we now, but where do we want to be, you know, and how do we both encourage and provide permission, but also guidance and structure so that there's necessary control where it needs to be, but also the necessary freedom for the energy to take place. And so having this 2-permit system, I think, will help with that process.
well, I think trying to remember too that sidewalk entertainment is not always just about singing. You know, people may want to write a poem, or they're sketching or doing portraits and things like that. So we've tried to look at what is the kind of the whole spectrum of busking performers and what they do. Food trucks. Everybody wants to talk food trucks. They are currently allowed, but it is very complicated. It is a really good example of trying to layer code on top of code, depending on when you're at, by these certain hours, within these certain hours. And I think it would come as no big surprise that this issue, kind of all the issues, is the one that I think generated quite a bit of discussion from the stakeholder committee, particularly for those who own brick and mortar businesses downtown, because here you've got a mobile business that they can park. Are they parking in front of a restaurant that's already there? Are they parking near one? How is that affecting things? Where we landed is identifying designated parking spots within the plazas, so that would move food truck resources all the way down the Santa Fe corridor. So it's not just kind of huddled into one plaza. It would also entice people to go to the plazas because the parking spaces would be near there that were designated for food trucks between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. And so that one kind of leads to making those spaces having purpose for them, the seating, the entertainment, those types of things. We're working with Parks and Rec for reservation spaces, whether it's reserving the plaza or reserving parking spots using Civic Rec, which is what they use for other park facilities, making it easy for people to do that online. And then food trucks could park anywhere between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So that, for the brick and mortar folks, most of them are done serving food by 10. So this kind of helps with that bar crowd and gives a bit more flexibility. We do have location and safety requirements. So, you know, you can't block this, you can't be too close to that. That gives some of those kind of general parameters. And like with many of the permits, and we'll get into this more, our goal is to kind of permit once for the year, and then you can kind of keep coming back as long as you can follow the rules, rather than each time you want to come, we got to do a permit, we got to do a permit. The idea is, here's the basic rules, let's get you in here and then these activities can flow. Push carts are another type of use that had a lot of discussion. Again, can compete with brick and mortar. So we recognize that we have 3 push cart types: food, commerce, and art. So commerce being you want to do a push cart that is part of parades, like along the sidewalk, or just in the summer you're kind of wandering around selling visors and umbrellas or something like that, or glow sticks, whatever that may be. Food, a lot of people think of like a hot dog cart, ice cream cart, those types of things. And then art, we have several of our art organizations in the community that have built and designed art carts that can be brought into the plazas to facilitate art no matter what time of year. And whether that's making something, music, visual arts, things like that. So we've created some design standards that just talk about how big the cart can be, quality materials, things like that, some safety features. Again, location. A lot of this is about you can't park in front of somebody's front door so people can get in and out. Like, we need to create safety there. You can't, park in front of a crosswalk. People need to be able to cross the street safely, things like that. And the fire marshal's office is asking that food trucks in particular, just kind of while we're on this slide, would get the hood suppression inspection like brick and mortar businesses do. So again, a lot of times brick and mortar are like, hey, we had to have this extra inspection. Food trucks would need to have that same thing.
Is that currently required on food trucks?
No.
Okay.
The rest of the safety requirements, though, if they have their food safety license from the state and they've met their other kind of licensing requirements to the state for food trucks, we would accept those as attachments to the permit. But the hood suppression component, both the fire marshal and the stakeholder committee thought was a valuable addition. And we think that could be, it shouldn't be a major hindrance. It can be done fairly quickly if installed right. And that's an example too of like how support materials. We had lots of discussions about food trucks that there's a really good route from St. Louis to Denver of food trucks kind of coming and doing this kind of cross-country number where they just kind of go back and forth between these communities and hit the festivals and everything in between, where would they be able to kind of get into Salina if we have this permitting method that requires the inspections? And everybody erred on the side of caution and said, look, our permits are going to be online. We'll accept these other safety certificates, but we think the hood suppression is important. If you've been here once, you're good for the year. That shouldn't be unreasonable. And I think lastly on food trucks, so Rod Meyer from Relish is on the committee, and they're kind of like the extreme exception because they have a massive food truck. It's not necessarily the standard size one. So that has also given us some really good perspective on looking at parking and trying to figure out like how big a space you need for a food truck that big. So they've been really involved in that process. Oh, special events. This could be a meeting all of its own. We do a lot of special events. And I think everybody gets excited for them. They're a huge part of what makes the community kind of have that X factor, right? And brings everybody together. But they are a beast to permit. We have no code currently adopted really that says, are there any violations and penalties? Here's what your permit process should look like. Here's how it goes. We haven't really addressed block parties very well. This summer we saw a lot of opportunities to improve and clarify on that issue. And one permit touches at least 10 departments. So just the process of doing that alone is quite a fee. We have speaking of fee, we have no fee for the application. And we don't charge additionally for any services like you need 4 police officers, we don't charge you per police officer. If you need barricades, we're not charging per barricades. And I say all that as just some background of kind of where we're at in this process.
Well, and many cities do.
Yeah.
A number of the model cities that we looked at charge for those services for special events.
I would tell you that special events was on the radar when I arrived going on 14 years ago, and it's just been an insoluble problem. We picked it up and put it down countless times.
Well, I think the sign of how much everybody was ready to talk about this is the stakeholder committee rallied behind this and said, yes, you gotta get this figured out because they happen all the time. And they happen at such varying levels, like what is a big deal, what's not a big deal, what needs resources, what doesn't need resources, how long should it take. And I think Brad and I were both nervous too, just trying to get all the departments together, because that is a lot of cats to herd even internally, to be like, are we all on the same page about what a new permit looks like, what do your rules say, what do our rules say. And it was amazing. Everybody showed up, we filled that room, and it was an exceptionally fruitful conversation. So I think from a staff perspective, everybody was like, we need to figure this out.
Well, from a practical standpoint, I'll use our department as an example. When we started doing Friday Night Live and programming Campbell Plaza and wanting to put a food truck in the parking lot, there were processes to allow each of those things to happen, but not clearly and not cleanly. And we were only allowed by the current kind of guidelines to do that twice in a year. And we were programming 14 weeks the first summer that we did that. And so only being able to have a food truck in the parking lot next to Campbell Plaza twice by the permitting that we had was really limiting for something that we're trying to infuse new life into a space. And so being able to address this at a variety of different levels like this will be really helpful for not only for our department and the work we do, but citywide.
So one of the first...
And I would add, and Brad and Lauren may not agree with me, but our lack of organization just facilitated the applicant's lack of organization. These are typically struggling to get organized and get things turned in on time, and we just feel an obligation to just kind of meet them wherever they're at, whenever it might come in. The more structure we can provide, the clearer our expectations can be, the more successful we all can be.
When we started with the initial concept of, one of the first things stakeholder committee said to us is, the application's too long. It's too long, it's too long, it stresses us out, it's overwhelming to people, and we worked really hard. We wanted to be able to say, you know what, let's just do one page or double-sided. Like, we've got to be able to do this. And when we started looking at different municipalities in Kansas, and one of the things we did with the stakeholder committee is they had all shared with us municipalities that they had liked visiting and that had vibrant downtown. So we have a massive library of all the codes applicable to those communities identified by the stakeholder committee. And we looked at theirs to see, like, what are we missing? Like, how are they doing this better? The applications are never smaller. They're never smaller. Because when you put these kinds of resources into connecting these kinds of pieces, you've got to ask the questions. And one of the things that we talked about with the stakeholder committee is, would you rather we ask the questions now, or would you like to get 75% through this, then get asked the question and find out you got to start all over again, or you're in the wrong department, or you're in the wrong piece? And what we all kind of agreed on is, yeah, let's ask all the questions that need to be asked. But is there a way to ask them to kind of filter people sooner rather than later? Is there a way to kind of find a layer to this? So not only in kind of looking at the subjects that we tackled in the application, we looked at application process. So everybody kind of fell in love with Grand Rapids, Michigan. They have a really, really, really nice resource guide that you can either flick through 1, 2, 3 and just take subject by subject, or you can go to a specific subject material kind of in their table of contents. So if you want to know about weddings, you want to know about plaza reservation, you want to know about all these different pieces, it's kind of a one-stop guide for doing special events in the city of Salina. And yes, we're talking about downtown, and we're going to hit on here in a second on some downtown specific things, but special events happen all throughout town. So the changes to special events will go citywide. But we found, I mean, just some of this is a business concept too. Every time somebody calls to ask about such special events, that's time staff is on the phone walking somebody through that process. If at 2 o'clock in the morning in your pajamas you want to know how to do a special event, I would much rather you start with a resource guide, so that by the time you make the call to us, you've had a chance to think about those. Because it's not fair, right? You call, we're going to start asking you questions, and you're probably not going to know the answers to them because you haven't had a chance to think about it. So the resource guide is just, it's huge in kind of starting that process off on the right foot. It also gets people thinking about many of the things that don't get considered. Insurance, timing, a time of year. So part of the process or the application will be what we call an intuitive application. We're going to be using Seamless Docs, which is a product we already have here at the city. But the application for special events will be done online, and it will start to kind of feel out. It's going to ask you some initial questions that if you can't answer those, time to halt, go figure those things out, and come back and do this. It's also going to help to make sure you're aware of things. One question we've never asked before, and they asked in Grand Rapids, and I was like, why have we never done that? It asks if you're having an event either here, here, or here, particularly during Smoky Hill River Festival. Because if you are, FYI, a lot of our city resources are over in this park, our barricades, our people. It might be more difficult to scale your event. So you may want to consider different dates. So again, kind of helping people through some of those initial thoughts. But then some of the other questions that will come after that will start to bring you into kind of two categories. There's really the basic permit that we want to be able to turn around fast in just a couple days. And that's no city services are required. You don't need us to turn on water, electric, you don't need us to open up bathrooms, you don't need barricades dropped off, that kind of stuff. It's for smaller groups and for low impact locations. So you're not doing major road closures, things like that.
No alcohol.
Yep, no alcohol.
So how are you doing that? You said, okay, code created, block parties addressed. Okay, block parties is big for us. I mean, you know, I think we've done a block party down, on Baker Street probably for the last 15 years, we've done one. You said you don't charge for barricade. You charge for barricades, but you don't charge for if you need 10 barricades, if you were, because we pay a fee for having the block party, for that, and then we also pay a fee for the sound permit, right?
We pay definitely for sound permit.
2 permits.
And
The special event permit for the block party and the special event permit for the sound.
Okay.
correct. But we don't specifically have anything that gets just to the block parties, and one of the issues that we've looked at in looking at other block party regulations in other cities is notification to the people around you. Because you want to close off the whole block, but not everybody signed up for that, even though they're all invited. So I mean, one of the things that would be added is if you're in that block party category is you need to submit notification. Either you did a mailer and we would have like a standard mailing that you could do, or you have a petition sign. There's a couple different options.
A recent phenomenon that I became aware of this year is blocking the street and then charging your neighbors to enter the block party, which came to my attention.
You gotta pay for it somewhere.
As a result of complaints that my neighbor's charging me to use my own street.
So our goal is not to say no to block parties, but to create some kind of criteria when people call about the block parties. And we don't generally charge to drop off the barricades. You maybe, I don't know about that exact fee, but like, I mean, I'm looking at Brad and other
Yeah.
events, we don't charge to drop that stuff off.
Yeah, there isn't a fee from Public Works for those services.
Maybe a fee for the
But
permit
that's
itself.
included in
Fee
it.
for the permit.
That's included in the
But
permit,
that doesn't
though.
even
Well-
cover the cost of the administration of the
Okay.
permit, let alone barricades or other staff time.
And then I heard you say control alcohol. How do you control alcohol? How do you control alcohol at a block party?
Well, I mean, some of this comes down to is, here are the rules, you need to follow them. But if it gets to the point that we're getting phone calls that it's not being followed and we have to go out there, you have to have some kind of code to be able to deal with that with. And that's how
Well,
our
and to
enforcement
go to your
goes.
point, Joe, the block party with alcohol does require city services. It would be an advanced permit. It's going to ask if alcohol is going to be served, and then it probably determines from ABC whether it's being done by a third-party provider or whether people bring their own. And since the street is closed, there's a lot more permission that can be granted through that process than if the street remained open and you just tried to let people cross
Okay.
and so on. So
Well,
there's.
even
So
with
Joe,
that-
what does your block party permits run between the sound and just the permit itself? Do you
I
have
can't-
any
I don't-
sense? I mean, I just was kind of curious how much it costs to do a
Alright,
block
sound
party?
permits, where's this thing?
25.
$25?
Yeah, I think it's,
Yeah.
And a special event permit is
no charge.
Yeah, there's
for
no
special
charge for that.
events.
Oh,
So I
that's
guess,
right.
Joe, without seniors, like, all I can think of is there's no charge for the special event permit. You may, I mean, if they had to get some kind of liquor license to be able to serve, but amplified sound is $25. And without, I
That's
can't think
it.
of anything we've talked about from Public Works perspective of other things they're charging for, because they drop off barricades all the time and there's no charge for that.
Yeah.
I mean, not to bog us down, but another thing that we realized this year is practice versus what our current policy says. And I think everybody has a sense of what a block party is or a neighborhood party, but if you read the code as it relates to blocking streets, it presumes some community-wide event. And it's a stretch to say that a neighborhood block party meets the current code language and definition to even rise to the level of being able to block the street. So we've got to get our code to match our practice as well.
So before I kind of jump to like the next, kind of the more advanced special events, because that's what a lot of people are familiar with. The other thing with the basic is we've been working with SDI, and for the downtown in particular, for an event where they need 3 parking spots or less. So let's say, Valerie, I know she'll let me use her as an example. Valerie needs 3 parking spaces in the back parking lot to host a band or do something. SDI is looking at purchasing their own cones, and they would be able to issue those cones for those small level permits. And that gives them some flexibility to have more entertainment and more options down there. It also gives them control over the parking situation, because they're the ones most affected by it. It also works for, the question came up on the food trucks. If I am whatever store and I want to host a food truck in front of my store during that 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. slot, you can do that basic level special event, and that lets them use a parking space, because that's that 3 or less, so that they can have that kind of promotional opportunity.
Just
Getting-
one quick question, just before I forget about it.
Yeah.
If you have like permitted buskers or a permitted special event, does that get you any kind of access to like city electricity or city water? Or is that something
Yeah.
where you're running the extension cord into a business or something?
So buskers in general, like if they are not selling merchandise and they are just busking, we are not going to permit them.
Okay.
Because it's a freedom
Right,
of expression
right,
kind of
okay,
thing,
okay,
so they
I'm
will
with
not
you.
need a permit.
Right.
But one of the things that we kind of all agreed on, whether it was stakeholder committee or staff, is once you start needing city services, you really end up in this advanced category.
Yeah.
And as much as we wanted to try and say like, well, only this or only that, as soon as you cross the line, you start involving all these other departments that have policies and things like that, and you just, the resource and the coordination is on.
Gotcha.
And so
And
So
the
that
only
will
reason you
automatically.
plug in as
Yeah.
a musician is for amplified sound.
Right, right,
And-
so
and
that's it,
that
yeah,
already takes care of it in the advanced permit as opposed to,
gotcha. So those will just automatically
Yeah.
accelerate to the
Advanced.
Advanced, okay.
So one of the things particularly that's downtown centric is the plazas. And working with SDI and the stakeholder committee is that the plazas will be reservable. They always have been, but the difference is that they will require a deposit on them. So you're not charging a fee, we've never charged a fee for it, but with all the advanced irrigation and infrastructure, we need you to return it the way you got it. Kind of just like Friendship Center or anything like that. So there would be a deposit. Plus it also makes people pretty conscious of, no, you can't have every Friday night in July. Like, you need to put, your $100 down, and you need to have gone through these processes to secure that. So you're looking for people who have genuine intent to use the space as intended, because that group space, it reacts off of everybody. I mean, if you're having a major event in there, it's gonna affect other things around you. As I mentioned, the application would be online. So from a fee perspective, I'll tell you right now, we've got our second internal staff meeting like next week. So based on the stakeholder committee feedback, based on staff's initial feedback, we've kind of got some scaled numbers that we want to put in front of everybody. But essentially in the advanced stuff, it's like $50, like $100, $150, and I think like once you're like in the mega category of like you got like 500 or more people, like it's $300. just $300, non-refundable, and there's no additional fees after that. That was a big thing for everybody, is not charging for those services. We're just not at that point, and how do you do that effectively? But we are gonna be calculating for your benefit, and just for staff's own benefit, how many police officers are we assigning to this? How many barricades did we drop off? So we at least have some understanding of what we are spending on special events as a community, because right now we don't really quantify that. So, and of course that's up to you guys. This is staff and stakeholder committee recommendations we'll be bringing to you, but that is the theory behind creating that. I think something definitely different along the money lines. We're not charging for all those services, but we are going to say that you need to be accurate in your application, and you need to have done the work to make sure that what we're permitting is correct. I'm not saying if you said you were gonna have 50 people and there's 57 that we're gonna come out there, but if you said 50 and you have 100 show up and you call and say, wow, I need more barricades, or we need this block closed off, or I didn't get the bathrooms opened, okay, we'll come do that, but you're gonna get billed for those services.
When you talk about like the application and kind of having I'm envisioning it as a flow chart. You answer this question, you go to the next, and then at some point, if you can't answer a question, then it tells you where to go. I'm assuming that at some point it splits off between what you apply to the city for and then what you would apply to SDI for,
So-
because it sounds like the plaza rentals and stuff is more of a SDI function, or no?
We
it
work
all
with
goes to-
SDI already,
Okay.
and we will take on those functions. But using
Okay.
Seamless Docs, Penny or whoever will have a user profile in Seamless Docs in which they can
Enter
digitally
that.
make their approvals.
Okay, okay. All right, so it's still all, it will funnel through the city.
It'll
It's
stay
just-
on the city
It's
side.
just that, like, SDI will sign off
Yep.
Yeah.
on it. Okay, okay,
Yeah.
I was just trying to figure out how
Permit
people knew
wouldn't get
where
approved
to
by
apply.
whether it's Lauren or
Whoever.
city commission or whatever staffing needed to approve wouldn't happen until SDI had checked off or acknowledged that they were aware of that or
Yeah,
did
I'm
something.
not sure we touched on it, but that is a feature of Seamless Docs, is routing and confirming that all the right people signed off.
It's also, to go back to Lauren's point about that document in particular, it is intuitive, so if you say no to something, you may not get 2 additional pages because they're not applicable, and you're only gonna see what's appropriate for you based on the answers that you've
Right, the
provided.
application.
That'll be a lot less cumbersome for anybody who's currently picking up 17 pages of application
And
and not
we will-
knowing what's appropriate or not.
We will have the Seamless Doc application and stuff at your second study session, just to kind of give you a feel for what it takes to go through that, just to give you a feel. One of the things that we've been talking a lot about with SDI on this is, it's not anybody's fault, but if the objective is to be as efficient as possible for the customer, to have to go to SDI to reserve, to have
Yeah.
to come to us to
Yeah.
permit, like, if we can put everybody into the same software,
Right,
Yeah.
that's
why
what.
wouldn't we?
Yeah.
So that's,
Well, and you might mention the Parks software then.
yeah. And Parks and Rec has been really helpful in recognizing, like, can Civic Rec use this? And Civic Rec is a very powerful tool for reservations. So you're actually able to have the calendar and be able to break it up into blocks. So 4-hour increments for food trucks. And they're able to see the map, they're able to get details about the site, things like that. So again, it will create that component. The nice things with Seamless Docs too is that one of the questions may be, have you reserved your space? If the answer is yes, it's gonna say, do you have a confirmation number? So when staff goes to review that, we can just look at Civic Rec and be like, yep, they've reserved it from this time to this time, though their application says something totally different. Cool, now we know to ask them, hey, do you guys realize your reservation and your application are slightly off? Or maybe they match, but it's a good digital resource to be able to make that review rather than 20 emails of everybody kind of going back and forth.
Okay,
To
so
go
they'll
back
be
to Mike's
looking.
point,
Right.
that is a great example of somebody who maybe doesn't know a lot about special events, that thinks they're gonna have a party from 8 to midnight or whatever, but then they forget about the 3 hours of setup time that it takes ahead of that. And so in terms of the reservation of that, or the intuitiveness of the application process and the guidelines, it should help them do a better job and the city be better prepared to respond to their requests.
So just kind of staying on this whole kind of process and procedure side, we've essentially ended up with everything permits in kind of one of two categories. You're either an allowed use permit or you're a license agreement. An allowed use permit is temporary in nature. You are not permanently affixing anything to the right of way or leaving it out there. We have tried really hard to do this kind of apply once a year method. It's similar to like our contract licenses. If you apply for a license and you get it March 3rd, you're good all the way through the rest of the year, and you could apply again on January 1, but if you didn't get around to it till March, okay, well, you've missed that slot. But that, from an efficiency point of view, it lets all these uses happen a bit more fluently. The permit can also be approved in-house, so it does not need to go in front of a decision-making body, where a license agreement is that permanent component. Most notable in the case of downtown dining, yeah, sidewalk dining, yeah. Because if you're serving alcohol at all, you have to have the railings and stuff that will be affixed to the sidewalk. But again, you want to leave chairs and things like that out there. But if you've just got signs, temporary furniture, like Tyler's got outside Seraphim, his bistro tables he takes in and out every night, Tyler would just get the temporary permit for the year, and then he's good to go.
I've just got just something occurred to me. Let's say that that Coops has things that they set out and bring in, and yet somebody wants to reserve Campbell Plaza. I'm sure that you guys have anticipated that scenario about who has the priority claim on like Campbell Plaza or whatever.
So for like basic sidewalks in front, like there's actually a measurement system for like how much usable space has to be remained, it has to be adjacent to the building, some other components like that. In the plazas, both with the sidewalks and the plazas, you have to submit a site plan, and with your site plan, you've said, this is where I'm gonna be.
Mm-hmm.
So, one, that kind of sets it up, and when we do that site plan review, we're recognizing those things. Sometimes in the plaza, it's a little funky because of the planters and stuff.
Right.
So we can take care of that through the site plan, but they have to recognize the allowable space. It's not like they can take up the whole plaza. So there's a calculation for the total square footage that they can have. And then if the whole plaza is reserved, the reservations kind of overrides that.
Supersede the-
Yeah.
The bubble would go away, so like if.
I got you. Okay,
if
that was my
SDI, for
question.
instance, well, that's a bad example. If there was a parade and a street fair, like 1976,
Right.
that was gonna be through the downtown, that might be a time, because the sidewalks would be necessary for the movement of pedestrians, that the city would say, sorry, your bubble isn't in effect for this weekend because the streets are full and the sidewalks are necessary for pedestrians. So,
gotcha.
yeah, those kinds of things.
Gotcha,
And
thank you.
hopefully, if I'm Coops as an example, and someone's reserved the plaza, that represents a business opportunity for me to have more people out front of my door, and hopefully worth my while.
The other thing is, I think that each of the plazas, they haven't been installed yet, but each of the plazas calls for some tables, some fixed tables. And so while they may lose the bubble, they still may be able to have some outdoor dining opportunities with that as well. The plazas are going to be a little bit more unique because of the footprint and the pedestrian activity that's there and probably have to be handled. He's one of the only businesses that opens into a plaza other than Seraphim.
Yeah, Spillman
And
with
so,
Seraphim. Spillman, right?
those two come to mind in particular, so.
One of the things we've talked about though with stakeholders is, it's not like the plaza's any better than the sidewalk. They both have pros and cons. Like, one is you kind of have events driven towards your space, right? So you're getting more visibility in certain occasions. You may get kind of a captured audience in certain situations. But then the same thing can apply to the sidewalks. They get certain types of visibility, but they get more access to certain events. So it's kind of, everybody has pros and cons to those different situations. I know we're running short on time. One of the things that SDI has recommended, and the stakeholder committee has talked a lot about this and is in favor of it, is there's an application fee similar to many of our application fees right now. But SDI is recommending an SDI fee. So if you, for instance, are a food truck, you are not paying any of the SDI fees that are part of the programming and enhancements, and they would like to put forward a fee of, is it $100?
$100.
$100 for that application for the year. So it's not like you're paying it every time you're coming, but you, just like brick and mortar, are contributing to that. SDI has agreed that since the buskers at the basic level are not being permitted, that they do not need to pay the SDI fee, but if you are a busker selling merchandise, there's a small $25 fee. But one of the things that this kind of does is, one, make sure that everybody's investing in downtown the same way. It also will be the point in which we remind people of the special sales tax in their permit, and acknowledging that in a check, that there's a unique sales tax, you need to be applying for that, and just gathering some of that data so that if it comes down to it and the state's like, where is everybody and are they charging the correct sales tax in the Star Bond district, we would be able to know yes, no, or at least they've acknowledged that. We are going to move to, we talked about seamless docks for special events, and special events is going to go into seamless docks because of that intuitive nature, but we're going to use Llama for all of the other ones. That's our current permitting software that we use for all of our licenses, but also like building permits and applications for planning. So the nice thing is that will geographically connect all those permits. So again, if Public Works is out somewhere and they're like, who signed off on this event? Or what is going on here? Well, you're able to see geographically, like, is there a permit that actually goes with that? Plus, we're able to see what sections of town are getting more types of events and activities. That moves into the map. If you're looking at this map and you're like, wow, Lauren and Brad, this looks a lot like Star Bond. It does look very similar to Star Bond. We had an entire meeting just dedicated to the boundary of what this was going to be like, and there were a lot of different iterations, but what everybody kind of landed on is the Star Bond really gives good credence to where all this entertainment would happen, going over to the theater and Burger King. But we did add is the city-county building. That wasn't added to the Star Bond because it's not a taxable site, but it is a great programming place and public space. We also added a parking lot over here, another good programming and public space that could get used. This residential down here, we've left, and in spots where we talk about things like transportation for hire. Did I miss that slide? Huh.
I don't think it was in there.
It wasn't in there, unless you just slipped by it.
Did I? Huh. Wow. We are also addressing transportation for hire. I just want to touch on this briefly. Is horse and buggy would need to get permitted, would need to comply with animal health and safety components, using model code from other cities in Kansas. So that will be addressed, where they can park, how long they can be parked, things like that. Also addressing pedicabs. We don't have any at the moment, but they are becoming more and more popular. So code for pedicabs. And then lastly, scooters. That's kind of a thing in itself. We've created kind of the spot for it that says right now, if you want to do scooters, like drop them off, the Bird or Lime scooters, you need to come talk to the city commission. And that was kind of a placeholder, so that when we're ready to get into that, we can. Back to our map, we've also been conscious, like in transportation for hire, to make sure approved routes and stuff are not interfering with residential areas, and being careful to kind of keep those areas separate.
Lauren, one other thing from a commission standpoint, because you do see residential in there, there will be guidelines for the food trucks and other things that say you may not park adjacent to a residential street. Or if there's business on one side, residents on the other, you got to be on the business side.
Yeah.
You know, you can't sell snow cones parked in front of just housing. And so,
One of the things we did recognize, though, is being part of downtown, though, there is that residential commercial mix, and part of it is part of a lifestyle. So as things grow a bit more, we just need to be prepared for that.
The other reason that you see some residences in there is because of the proximity to the river, and with future development, the boardwalk, and the other things that are going to be happening, we wanted to make sure that both for entertainment and for pretzel carts and other things that might be occurring on that 10-foot boardwalk between the downtown and Oakdale Park, that there was a way to be able to do that. And so that's why it's in there.
And Jane with Friends of the River has been a part of the committee this time, making sure that we stay aware of that. I think before, we talked a little bit about support materials. These are just examples of the types of materials that we would develop to support this stuff. You know, you're wondering where to park something, well, here's the graphic. Sometimes a picture is worth a thousand words. I guess before we kind of get into schedule, two things that I just want to touch base on, and I think kind of part of that expectation, and I think one of the things that staff's been not shocked about, but we're just trying to be really conscious of is we're trying to write code for uses that don't even exist yet. So it's a lot different than certain things where we're like, oh, the environment's doing this, we're having these types of violations or this type of level of usage. We don't necessarily have those. So one of the things that we've talked about with the committee, in fact, they brought it up to us, is that at 6 months and 12 months, they would like to touch base and meet as a committee again to give feedback on, is there stuff that we're missing? Is something feel kind of wonky? Did we, because some of the stuff you're just not going to know until it starts to happen. So I feel confident that what we'll bring forward is good, solid code. And the stakeholder committee has, all of them contributed a couple meetings ago, are these scenarios that we're using to beta test the code. So it's things that they want to do downtown from their perspective as users that we then kind of test the code with to see if it would work the way we want it to. We had a very ambitious schedule. I think we're still going to come in under a year of trying to do this with this kind of level of special stakeholder committee involvement. But we had originally wanted to bring the second and third or city commission meetings of December, our first and second reading. And I think just in working with the stakeholder committee and with legal staff, we just want to take a little extra time to really make sure that we're comfortable with all the gears, but when you start to hook them together, they need to all turn correct. And so we're moving our first and second readings to January 27th and to February 3rd. That gives enough time for us to get through another staff special event meeting to make sure that we're comfortable with those costs and process and things like that, and they jive with what the stakeholder committee recommended. We have, our stakeholder committee kind of broke out and said, hey, I'm a good person to review this certain type of code, whether it's food trucks or special events, so that we didn't have to pull them all back together, that they're kind of this sub-review committee that we could share drafts with and they could provide us immediate feedback. So we'll be working with them at the end of December. We have your second study session is 1/13, and like I said, moving into first and second reading. Also, while that's happening, is we're setting up the background stuff like the applications, building those into Llama so they're ready to go upon adoption, making sure that Seamless Docs is ready, the resource guide. So we actually have a resource guide already drafted and a draft of the application. So
And those dates are ahead of special event season if there is such a
Yes.
thing.
Although some applications would start coming in pretty quickly for those who do plan further out.
And our initial hope was to be done, so January 1, we could take all fresh new events, and if you did your annual permit, you'd get the whole year. But after just kind of going back and forth with some of the folks on our team, there's so much work put here that we would rather just take a little extra time to kind of finesse things, to be really comfortable with it. And, I mean, you can see how much to take in. We haven't even really talked about, like, the draft itself in front of you guys, plus, like, what that application process looks like. It's a lot to try and have just one study session and then ask you guys to make such significant legislative decisions, because you're going to have new alcohol language, you're going to have special events, the district itself. It's a lot.
And we're, all the different software apps or platforms can communicate with each other in terms of like the calendar through whatever the Parks and Rec software is, I've already forgotten that name, and then Llama and then Seamless Docs, those three things can work together?
Not necessarily.
Well, you'll copy and paste, for instance, the email that you get or the reservation number from Civic Rec, and just paste it into the application that you'd be filling out, but they're not the same software. It's not a single company that manages all of
Right.
this.
So if I'm filling out an application, I'll
There'll be a link.
go to the calendar first.
Yes.
Make the reservation
And
on
if you
one
haven't, there'd be a
platform.
link out that would say,
Have you made a reservation?
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
If you
So
haven't,
Seamless
you need
Docs-
to, because
Okay.
no sense going on with the application if the plaza's
Okay.
already reserved.
Okay.
Seamless
so it'll
Docs
be-
will give you a hyperlink
Okay,
and
so-
say, please let us know your confirmation number. And then what we've done this last year or so dealing with downtown is we have this massive table and it's every permit applicable in downtown right now. And what we talked about with SDI is once these pieces are pulled together, we would reconstruct that page to kind of be that downtown resource page. Here's the resource guide for special events. Here's the Llama link. Here's the Seamless Docs link. So you don't have to know there's 3 different spots to go. You would have one spot
One-
to start.
yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Can't necessarily link all the software together.
Right.
And the nice thing is if you are familiar and have done any other types of thing in the city, like the Llama stuff, you create a Llama profile, it's gonna pre-generate your information into your applications. And Civic Rec does the same thing. You create a profile and a lot of your initial information's already there. So a lot of users like that. You don't have to start from ground zero every time they apply.
I think before you turn it over, I would like to note Lucy Kola from KU Med, who attended virtually every meeting that we had. Gail Martin is representing the Salina, the Economic Development Organization as a board member. Mitch had a conflicting meeting at the times of those, and so she volunteered to serve. And that is Sylvia Rice, who you all know, was a representative from the travel and tourism area. So we do have some members of the steering committee if you had any questions for them.
And then internal staff was Dean, Dustin, John, myself, and then Brad, Grace, and Anna from Arts and Humanities, and we met almost weekly, if not bi-weekly, as a project team to make sure that that we had a human side and a creative side to what we were writing to make sure the code would apply and kind of understanding how to communicate those things, but also being able to create kind of a legal framework for the many ideas that were coming out of the programming. So it was a really good partnership.
It's the first time we've been called human in a long time.
Don't let it go to your head.
We're not going to get used to it.
So for that, you can ask all your questions to Brad.
Yeah. Anything you don't like, text me. If you like it, go back to Laura.
Just one little picky one. For the food trucks, do they have to have engines off when they're sitting still?
That's a good point.
Yes,
I don't know if we have
well, I
that
think there's a, I don't know that we addressed that specifically, but we did talk about generators or power. The silent run or that, there'd be noise considerations.
Yeah, that they can't have a separate generator over a certain volume level, and they can't have, like, almost every use can't have additional noise projection. So, like, you can't have, like, these bells going, wee-oo, 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 come to my food truck, like, no. Like, and even the carts and stuff. There is
They had to
some...
provide their own trash service, and it's kind of an inclusive thing. And if it's a trailer, going back to like Rod's thing, if it's a separate trailer, you can't, the vehicle that's towing can't be attached while the trailer is set. So, or if it is, it has to stay within the footprint that's been allotted in the designated spaces, so.
Trying to keep the gas fumes from...
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
particularly
think
if there's
that's...
sidewalk seating nearby.
That's a good point. So we can, I will double check to make sure that you've got to be turned off. I mean, most of them don't want to run anyways, and if they have their generators, we've already designated, like, you can't go plug into one of our power sources to run stuff. So that's a really good point.
I haven't
Mr.
seen
Mayor.
one run from their engine power in town. I mean, they all run with portable power or propane generator or a gas generator, but not a combustion engine.
But we can definitely, I mean, it wouldn't hurt to clarify that, so it's a good point.
It's a lot of work.
So at the next meeting, we'll get like the fee schedule, the code and enforcement information. Is there a chance of getting that in advance? Because I'm guessing there's a lot of information there. It'd be kind of nice to review it if we could
Depends
get
on
that with the
how,
packet.
what stage of drafting it's in.
Well, I mean, we're pretty
How
far
ready for
along.
prime time we are.
Yeah, even if it just says preliminary on it or something to give us some ideas would be helpful.
I think
Yeah.
we can definitely do that, when the packet goes out ahead of time, we would have the draft available for you guys to start considering, not necessarily for action, of course, because it's a study
Right.
session, but for some feedback. I think that's very doable.
Well, you guys have put so much work into it, and it covers so many different areas that, yeah, I think, like Commissioner Hoppett suggested, it would be nice to be able to get to preview it, because we've got a lot of catching up to do.
Well, we've kind of taken the liberty to deal with Chapter 5, which is alcoholic beverages. And I'm sure you guys kind of remember this spring, the state made some really wonky choices that affected cereal malt beverage and things like that. And our code has never been that easy to read. And we also don't have common consumption areas, which is it's a tool for allowing kind of that use of alcohol in a public space. It was adopted like 2 years ago, and we haven't since added that to our code. So we've been working with Clark Mines Linville to update that whole code just to deal with the state changes, plus to add common consumption areas, which I think will help a lot with permitting, especially in the plazas.
I would like to say for your benefit, and it's going to sound like we're tooting our own horn as city staff, but when Lauren asked our staff to participate, one, I was grateful for having the opportunity to do that, because having special events and creating an energetic environment in downtown and throughout the city is important. But what she and her staff have been able to do with that stakeholder committee in terms of the level of preparation, the guidelines, the visuals, the openness and transparency of this whole process has been phenomenal. It's run on schedule, and and the people who came to the last meeting in November, about half the group stayed 30 extra minutes because they just weren't done talking. Yeah, I mean, they followed up on the things that inspired them, and I didn't hear anything negative about the structure, the process, the inclusion. I did hear an appreciation for the amount of detail that they had to go through and what the challenge was, but I think and her staff should be commended for taking something this large and that you've been looking for 14 years and putting it together.
Well, and the stakeholder committee's been amazing. I mean, I've been at this almost 20 years. I mean, Dean and I have talked about this a couple of times. You can hold a committee and people can show up. That doesn't mean they're going to help or they're going to do anything. These people came prepared. They read their material. They discussed. They disagreed. They came back around and found compromise. And I mean, I think any of us would step forward and say, like, we have had a process in which people had a voice, and we tried to reflect that as much as possible where we could. I mean, if it's illegal, we can't do it, but I mean, in general, we've tried to have a lot of back and forth between everybody.
Well, Brad kind of beat me to the punch, but this covers multiple topics that I don't want to say we're in the too hard pile, but we're in the very hard pile at least. And then you throw on top of that a public process with a committee of 30. I have a lot of respect for Lauren taking it on at the outset, and I've had countless positive feedback from people that participated. They appreciate how it was done, appreciate the opportunity, and like the fact that we're trying to get ahead of the future of downtown and facilitate it. So
We'll put that same committee on the recycling and solid waste.
Oh, look at the time.
Your next project.
Your emails.
Don't leave yet. It's 3:45. Is there anyone here who wanted to speak, ask, or comment about any other topic or this topic? Yes.
Since you asked
Right.
this topic, the question occurs to me if you talked about how this might interface with the whole idea of transient merchants, which the state regulates, but I don't believe the city does. The idea that a transient merchant is someone who holds a lease of less than 30 days, might be a photographer in a hotel room. It could be the black velvet Elvis paintings being sold out of a truck in a parking lot. which can happen in a private lot. I don't know that the city will allow that in a city lot, but there are a number of private lots downtown that you could have people come into and engage in that sort of activity, whether they might be welcome or not. I just wondered if you'd talked about that. Is that covered under the special events section?
So there's kind of three different things that coincide with that. Right now, if you want to sell Velvet Elvis paintings in a abandoned gas station parking lot, you would need a temporary use permit. Those exist at this time. As far as downtown, as that discussion went, being able to just find a spot on the side of the sidewalk and just roll out a blanket and sell stuff, the group decided like they were not down with that. That you either need to have a push cart, you need to be a busker, and that busker one it's condensed into like from your guitar case. You know, it's not this whole thing. Or you've got the bubble, right? But we have said to merchants for the bubble, like it has to coincide with your store. No different than your dining space has to coincide with your dining space. We are working on some language for temporary like pop-up businesses. That came up. Right now we could do one through a temporary use, but one of the things the stakeholder committee said was like, hey, if you've emptied out this storefront and it was a retail spot, but you want to turn it into a Santa Claus village for the next 30 days, we can do that right now with a temporary use permit, but we wanted to make something more customized for downtown. We just haven't written that piece yet based on the need for all these other components. Stuff being sold out of hotel rooms and stuff like that, that's kind of interesting. I've never pondered that. But temporary uses as far as structures or spaces being reused, we have thought of that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments? I've talked to a few people who have been on this committee. They weren't really talking about it, but when the meeting came up, they said, oh, I gotta go, I gotta run down to the to the ordinance meetings. Well, they're kind of excited to get there. So I assume you all were having fun down there while you were putting this together.
Some lively discussion.
Yeah, it wasn't all que sera, sera. I mean, there were some distinct but philosophical and functional differences from some of our new investors downtown who are making multi-million-dollar investments in space and taking exception to how close we wanted to allow a food cart, for instance, to be to their business, that they're going to rely on some of that revenue from there, but also knowing that, you know, if we have tournaments at the field house and activity at a hotel and plazas that are full and retailers that are energizing their storefronts and sidewalks and other things, that it'd be nice to have a structure in place to be able to say yes. So and to give some freedom. And for instance, when one of the people said, no, I think it ought to be 100 feet from my business and other similar businesses, well, that effectively wiped out for a pretzel cart to be in the 100 to 200 block of South Santa Fe based on the current distances from where restaurants are or going to be. And so that was too restrictive, you know. And so being able to compromise on that and say, no, let's look at some of those distances, maybe narrow them a little bit, but not put them right in front of the entry, you know, to another business. That.
I think one of the biggest learning features is we had lots of ideas, but once people started to see them in code, it's kind of a new perspective. Oh, so that's what 200 feet looks like, or, you know, and I think that's been a really interesting part of the last couple of months, is all these ideas kind of coming to reality.
Well, we will greatly appreciate knowing that someone else has done all the work for us when it comes back to the commission.
The first step of the work.
Right.
It's a grand experiment.
Well, we
A
will
little thought out one.
break until 4 o'clock. Thank you.